Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, fighting the cut. We speak to activists determined to eradicate female genital mutilation from within their own communities. Monica Bilal is back from her vacation. We have got a lot of work for you to do. The community has a lot to say, but we've talked about FGM before, many times. But this is a very specific focus because we're looking at FGM being practiced in the UK and the US. What's our community saying?
These are communities that people don't often think of it in. Our community is a little bit more educated. They are talking about why this persists despite being illegal in the UK and the US. There's one answer. This is from a tweet from Uganda. Ahmed says, these traditions and cultures are held by immigrant communities. They're greatly valued despite the effects on women and their reproductive health. We'll talk about those effects during today's show. We can't do it without you though. Tweet us your questions and comments with hashtag EJStream.
Joining us in the studio, we have Jaha Marie Dukure, and Jaha is founder of Safe Hands for Girls. That's a non-profit focused on protecting women and girls from female genital cutting. Jaha, it's really great to have you here in the studio.
Thank you guys for having me.
And you'll hear more from Jaha in just a little moment. The conversation starts in a moment, but if you want to join in, be sure to add us on Google+. You can see it there on my laptop. Let us know what you think and we'll do our best to get your opinions into today's show.
I'm Jean DeClercq at the BU School of Public Health, and I'm in the stream.
Female genital mutilation, or FGM, affects around about 130,000 women and girls in the United Kingdom. This despite the fact that it has been illegal there for more than 30 years. And in the United States, activists like Jaha say the banned practice continues as well, shrouded in secrecy. Female genital cutting is some 2,000 years old and is still done today as part of cultural traditions in Eastern and Western Africa and some parts of Asia and the Middle East. It's defined by the World Health Organization as cutting the vagina for non-medical reasons and has been declared a violation of human rights by the United Nations. Recently, both the American and the British governments vowed to dedicate funds and resources to eliminating the practice from happening in certain immigrant communities. But is there enough political will to stop these practices in the West? And what kinds of education programs are actually needed? Joining us from London, we have Layla Hussein. She's the co-founder of Daughters of Eve and a psychotherapist. Also in London, Jane Ellison. She's a parliamentary Undersecretary of State for Public Health and an MP for Battersea. And Matt Chisty is Commander for the North London Metropolitan Police and the National Chief Officer Lead for FGM and Forced Marriage in the UK. So great to have you all here, guests. Layla, I know that you spend a lot of time talking about FGM. It's such a personal, intimate conversation to have with somebody. When you talk to somebody who has no idea what it is, somebody in the UK, for instance, what do you tell them?
I mean, for me, obviously, the moment I recognize this as a form of child abuse and one of the worst forms of violence against women and girls, for me, there wasn't any difficulties in talking about that issue because then we're not particularly making it an other issue. So if we say it's child abuse, then we go from that particular point. You know, it's not easy. It is a very difficult subject. What
do you actually say? I've seen you campaigning and you talk to people who actually, you can tell from their faces, they actually have no idea what it is. What do you say?
I don't know if you've seen my documentary, The Crawl Cup, where I use vagina cupcakes to lure people into a pink booth that I set up in the middle of South Bank in London. But for me, it was important for people to see exactly what happens to the women, because we can talk about FGM all day, every day, but actually seeing the physical effects that happens to women, it's unimaginable. Even for me, who's from the practicing community, still can't believe this is something that goes on till today. I think people need to be given the facts and figures.
Jaha, you do something very similar to Layla, where you go out and you try and spread the word. What is it that you tell people?
I mean, for me, I think it's letting people know, like Layla said, FGM is a form of child abuse and is a violation against the rights of women and girls. So just taking that approach and educating our community, because I believe the only way we can end FGM is by creating a social change. We have to change these traditions from within, not just talking about it, but actually working with the communities, working with the religious leaders, working with the women that are impacted by FGM, and letting them know that just because they went through it doesn't mean that they can't protect their kids from going through it. And that's one of the ways that we use to advocate against FGM.
Sure. Well, Layla, what a lot of our community members are talking about is the why they see this occurring. Several people have things to say about that. Aya on Twitter says, in Ethiopia, FGM is practiced to eliminate sexual pleasure. It's thought to make the woman wild. Another person tweets in, the idea of genital cutting has health benefits. That's based on a cultural belief that the part that's cut off has no value. What is the why?
I mean, FGM is practiced for many different reasons, and also it depends which part of the world you're from. For example, where I'm from in Somalia, we were told it was a religious practice, and other parts they would say it's for cultural practices. But obviously, controlling women's sexuality is the reason why FGM is practiced. Yes, one of the tweeters that said, it is to eliminate the sexual pleasure for a woman. That's what really FGM has been practiced for. And again, apparently as women, we are supposed to hold the honor of the family. Why is that on me? That's really the discussions that we need to be having, regardless of why FGM is actually practiced. At the end of the day, violence is violence. Nobody would question me if I was cutting my daughter's hand right now for the sake of culture. So I think it's time we actually realize, this is not a cultural practice, it's not a religious practice, it's violence and full stop.
Jaha, I see you nodding. Do you mind sharing with us what actually happened to you?
I'm originally from the Gambia, and I went through FGM as a baby. I was about a week old when I went through FGM. And I went through the type 3 FGM, which means that I was infibulated. And when I was 15 and got married for the first time, I had to be de-infibrillated in order to consummate the marriage. Infibulated, which means I had to be reopened in order to get married. So because of that, we consider FGM as child abuse, because there's there's wrong and there's right. And as human beings, we know that what's wrong and what's right. And as a woman that have been through the practice, that knows the consequences of what this means, I can't see another girl go through it. It's just like what Layla said. If you were cutting your daughter's hand, or if you were cutting up their ear, or if you were doing something else to them, no one will look at you.
Any other part of the body.
Exactly. No one would look at you.
Which is bizarre, isn't it?
I think the sun has gone off. Hold on.
Okay.
So no one will look at you and tell you that, this is not child abuse. But then when it comes to female genital mutilation, we want to treat it as a cultural issue. We don't want to talk about it. And governments in the West, they don't want to, they shy away from the issue. In Washington, people don't even want to mention the word vagina because I don't know if politicians are afraid. I don't know the reasoning behind it. But it's just something that people tend to shy away from. And it's something that we have to talk about.
Right.
We have to educate girls that are at risk of this practice.
Jane, I see you nodding. What's behind that nod as Jaha was talking?
Well, yes, both Layla and Jaha are quite right that for so long people have shied away from talking about FGM, and politicians have been afraid to raise it. I think that we are doing a lot better now. Certainly in the UK, we feel we're at the forefront of what we hope is a worldwide movement, and right around the world we see people being prepared to tackle it. And both ladies are exactly right to say that it is a complete failure of imagination that just because this is a wounding an intimate part of the body, that we can't identify it as child abuse. I think that we began to make the breakthroughs here in the UK when we just said very plain and simply, this is another form of child abuse, and we have to apply all the same sort of criteria in trying to protect girls, in trying to eliminate the practice that we do in other forms. The fact that it's an intimate part of the body is just something we have to get over.
Well, Maka, I want to bring you in here, picking up on what Jaha said and on what Jane was saying about tackling this, yet you see people shying away from the problem. So there's a video comment here from a member of our community on some of the cultural sensitivities. Have a listen to this.
I think the biggest challenge to overcome female genital mutilation is the fear of offending the culture and tradition of communities concerned. Instead, the right thing would be to treat FGM for what it is, a serious child sexual abuse of the most heinous kind. Strong political will along with stringent law enforcement will quell this honor-based violence. Not speaking up against this oppression will only result in more innocent lives lost.
So Mac, how do you go about tackling it while balancing those cultural sensitivities?
Well, we're not going to balance this cultural sensitivity. This is straight forward child abuse, where you disfigure, you maim and you kill. 1 in 8 girls die as a result of this practice. And it is not religious, it is not in any way a faith-driven issue. And I absolutely agree with Jaha that actually the will to do it has to come within that community, and that's through better awareness, realising it's a dangerous act, realising that it defigures and maims people for the rest of their lives. And as a Muslim and as a father of a 22-year-old daughter myself, why would I want to do something like this that's going to hurt and harm my child? And it's certainly not a religious practice in Islam whatsoever. So we have to get that understanding into our communities, and it has to be a community-driven issue that actually starts to eradicate this practice.
Mac, I'm going to show our audience a map. This map is where female genital cutting is happening the most. So the orange and the red areas, lots of places across Africa where you'll see female genital cutting. The yellow areas again where you see female genital cutting, probably not as strong as perhaps in Africa. But the real revelation on this map are these light green areas where immigrant communities have taken the tradition. So we've got the UK, through parts of Western Europe, through Canada, the US, and across through to Australia. So if you're trying to stop this, what do you have illegally to stop it from spreading, Mac?
Sorry, I missed that. What do I have legally?
Yeah, legally. What are the laws? What are the laws to stop people from cutting, and are they working?
The law is quite. Yeah, thank you. The law is quite clear that anybody performing that practice in the UK, it's against the law. Anybody taking a child out to any country in any part of the world to perform a cutting practice, it's against the law. So you cannot take a child out if you're a UK resident or a permanent member of the UK. You just cannot do it. So we have got the law to do it. What we really need is we need information coming from the community, so they've got confidence in us so we can deal with it properly. And also, as communities become more integrated into society and understanding grows, we are seeing signs that it's being challenged and the practice is being dropped. And communities in the UK have an awful lot of influence in their countries of origin. So I absolutely appeal to them, for them to have a voice, for them to be influencing their countries of origin to stop this barbaric act.
Jaha, you were saying that in Washington it's even hard to get a politician to talk about a vagina, which is pretty difficult if we're talking about FGM.
I mean, it is. I went to Washington a couple of months ago to lobby members of Congress on the issue of FGM because we had a petition on change.org, and we were trying to get the Obama administration to conduct a prevalence study. And a lot of the politicians that I met didn't even know what FGM was. A lot of people in the US, like people that took an oath to protect girls in America, don't know what FGM is, don't know how to address the issue. I mean, we have a lot to learn from countries like the UK. They've done a lot from their passport inserts, from the things that the police officers are doing. The US, we're just starting to do something about the issue. Since 17 years ago when we conducted the last prevalence study, we haven't done anything pretty much on FGM. And when we say that I remember when I met the Secretary for Global Women's Issue, Cathy Russell, in London at the Girls Summit, and I told her that it's worst in the US. She was actually surprised because we have, the US is bigger. We have more states, we have more immigrants, and for anyone to think that FGM is not a problem in the US, I think is actually not looking at it from an immigration standpoint. Sure. And we have to teach people about the laws in the US. Obama passed this law. At first, FGM was illegal in the US since 1996. But then last year, he passed a law to make transporting girls out of the United States illegal. But no one really knows about the law because no one is actually talking about it. There's no education. Like people like Layla in the UK, they're doing their psychotherapy. They're helping women. In the US, we don't have those same services.
So what stories are you telling politicians to persuade them?
I mean, the girls that we work with, the stories that we've shared in the media, the girls that have came out, the brave women.
Tell me one. Who knows who's watching right now? Tell me one.
I mean, I can't give you their names, of course, because of privacy reasons.
Yes.
But we have a girl that we're working with. She's originally from Guinea. She and her sister were sent to Guinea to undergo FGM. And unfortunately, her sister died as a result of it. She made it.
How do you die from that?
I mean, bleeding, infections. There's a lot of things that go on that can lead to that. Her sister died as a result of going through FGM, and she survived it. And one thing that she said that I still remember to this day was she was praised for surviving the act. They said she was brave when she survived it, and because her sister died, they made her feel like she was the brave one, she was the lucky one, she was the one that survived it. And to this day, when I think about that, it breaks my heart to see that she has to live with that. And one thing she always says is, Jahad, this is someone that I used to play dolls with. We used to share the same room, and when I came back, she wasn't there. And to think that, you know, I saw her, we went through the same thing, and then she was, you know, I mean, just thinking about it and talking about it, you get a bit emotional, because these are girls that you work with, and these are girls that you have to deal with. And for me going through it, I can talk about it openly and not be afraid. But for them to this day is something that's, they're still traumatized. You know, just the thought of it.
Can I just comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
Femi, can I just?
I'm going to do Jane first, and then Mac. Jane, you go first.
I just want to pick up some of the points that were being made there, and I think to the message to campaigners, brave campaigners like the two you've got on tonight, is that they can inspire politicians to take this up. Before I was a health minister, I actually started the UK Parliament's all-party group on FGM. And it was actually meetings and conversations with some of the campaigners, people who've been victims of FGM, were prepared to talk about it, that really gave me the confidence to go and talk about it. Too many politicians worry that they're going to cause offence. I would also say I think sometimes politicians are guilty of only talking to leadership figures within some communities and not talking to women and girls enough. But I think that what Jaha is doing in drawing attention to the issue, and I would encourage her to talk to as many politicians individually as she can, to give them confidence, because certainly my conversations with people like Layla, who I've come to know well over the last couple of years, and other campaigners, gave me the confidence to speak out and to understand that I was actually doing what they wanted.
Jane,
rather
so
than
what does
risking
Jaha
offending them.
have to say to a politician to make them not afraid to actually tackle this subject? Talk to her directly. She'd love to hear from you.
Well, I mean, I'm a huge admirer of what she's doing. I can only tell her what really had an impact on me. As a Member of Parliament who'd certainly realised that FGM was happening to children in my community in London, I sought out campaigners and had conversations that were, you know, they were saying to me, we want you to talk about this. We want you to make speeches in Parliament about it. We want you to talk about it on the radio. And that gave me confidence to overcome what I think is one of the barriers that a lot of people who aren't from practicing communities feel, which is they fear the language, they fear how to talk about it, they fear that they will be offending. And actually what you realise is there are lots of women out there and girls, and increasingly fantastically we hear their voices loud and clear in the UK, who are saying, actually, I want you to speak out, you know, I'm demanding you speak out, and it gives politicians confidence.
Right, Jane, I'm actually happy you said that. We actually have this tweet who's saying the same thing. Dawn on Twitter says an educational campaign might do well, starting by determining and addressing the motivations for cutting, with follow-up with sharing victim stories. Dawn goes on to say, I met a woman in Tanzania who told everyone how terrible FGM had been to her, and she's changed some minds. Now, Mac, I want to go to you with how to enforce this where you are. This is a video comment for someone talking about hospitals and the role that they might play. So have a listen to this.
If a mother presents to give birth in a Western hospital and she has FGM, that information needs to be recorded along with other health information about the baby. If the baby is a girl and the mother has had FGM, that baby should be systematically checked every year as part of her regular health care for FGM. And the mother and the father and all the family need to be informed about the laws and also about the health problems associated with it.
Mac, could the hospital be an enforcer?
I think, can I pass that point on to Jane? Jane's personally done an excellent amount of work on this, and the recent developments in that are certainly going to be addressing some of those points. So before I leave this point, I'd like to refer that one to Jane, but you know, can I just make a couple of points if I may?
Please.
When we talk about child abuse, it's easy to just use the word child abuse. And people think it's just one of those things. It is not. When a girl gets cut, it is not in a medical setting. It is not done by medical trained, qualified practitioners. It's done in a dirty setting normally. It's a young girl who's held down, forcibly held down. Instruments that are used are unclean. Sometimes it's broken shards of glass that are used. And you ask the question, how do girls die? Yes, it can be infection, but 1 in 8 girl dies because they bleed to death, because an artery is severed. And I can't think of many more ways, worse ways to die than children who are bled to death. And then you come on to motivations. I heard a story not so long ago where a young girl of 8 years old had bled to death, and there's almost rejoice in that village, saying that she had almost been sacrificed in the name of God. Well, what God has ever demanded this? There's no faith whatsoever on this earth that drives this. It is physical, violent abuse of young girls, and it's about time we stopped it, because we have a responsibility, and that community has responsibility. And sometimes people, for whatever reason, shroud it that it's a faith-driven demand and an obligation. It is not. Some communities, the motivations are more superstitious.
Sure.
And I know
Mac,
communities who
we're almost at
think
the end of
that-
this part of the programme, so just take a breath for a moment, because you wanted to share a question with Jane, and I need Jane to answer that before we wrap up the show.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just deal very specifically with the points made by the caller on hospitals. We do feel hospitals can do more in the health system. I'm a health minister. We feel that our role is to prevent FGM, to protect girls, and to care for its victims. I don't think we've talked enough about that in this country for many years. And one of the things that we are doing, exactly what was mentioned in the clip you played, which is that we are beginning to record data. We are recording family histories of FGM. We are looking at ways in which we can track particularly girl children from practicing families and protect them through that way. So we're putting a lot of changes through. We've announced a lot of changes earlier this year, and we have more to come.
Layla, before we go, I'm going to play out for this part of the programme. I'm going to take you all to the post show at stream.aljazeera.com, because there's so much to talk about. But I'm sitting here on YouTube, and there's a little song called Use Your Head from a group called Integrate Bristol. These kids are fantastic. These young people are amazing. They're young people from different cultures, different communities, who all now live in the UK. And they did a song, a song about FGM. You'll be surprised how catchy it is. What do you need to tell our audience about this song before I play a little bit of it? Because you're in it too.
Yeah, it's one of those. I had a chance to appear in a music video, in my life.
Yes.
Right? It's not just about FGM. The video is about women oppression.
Right.
So it's all forms of violence, of oppression of women.
Okay.
But these young people, really, I'm not even joking when I say this, but they really re-energized the campaign in the last couple of years, because you do need young, energetic.
All right. Let's hear them. Jane is in this video. Layla is in this video. It's young people of Bristol. Have a listen.
See the people of the future. Yeah, we've been changing. We've been changing things. We've been changing. We've been changing the world in which we want to live. Come on, let's walk taller. Trace our footsteps now.
Jane, you've got rhythm. Layla, you can dance. Mac, why are you not in this video? We need to get you in the next one straight away. Do you know what I find about this video? It's very uplifting for a conversation that is very, very upsetting, to come out on a high note and for young people to say, this is our future, we're going to take hold of it. It's a very positive way to end this part of the conversation. So, Jane and Max and also Layla and Jaha, we're taking you to the post show. Lots more to talk about at stream.aljazeera.com. Let me just tell you about our next AJ stream. From toxic milk to expired meat, how do people in China know what's safe to eat in a country troubled by food safety scandals? That conversation for another day. See you soon. Thanks for watching. Hello again. We're discussing female genital cutting in immigrant communities in the West. Let's get right back to that conversation. Do you know, something that I feel that we haven't touched upon in detail is education. I know Mac talked about the communities and you have to get into the communities for people to understand what it is that are happening to young girls in the UK, in the US. Layla, how are you tackling this? Because you have a very interesting tactic. It's very in your face. What are you doing?
Absolutely. I think for me, especially being from the practicing community, it was important that we called FGM for what it was. I think for me, language really was the barrier. The language we were using when we talked about FGM, you know, we kept using the word religion and culture and, you know, something. There was a lot of political correctness around it. So for myself and other campaigners, we said, you know what, enough is enough. This is violence, and it's scarring our children, not just physically, but emotionally. So for me, actually putting in, I don't know if you've seen, I use plasticine vaginas, and I usually just start cutting them right in front of men, actually, when I work with men. That's
so slow down a second, because I have seen the documentary, but a lot of people haven't. So describe the plasticine prop, and then what you do with it, and then the guy's reaction, because it's worthy of just the description alone.
That idea came about because of my previous work with men. What I found with the men was that they kept saying, wait, Layla, it's just a circumcision. It's not really a big deal. So I noticed they really didn't know how the procedure actually took place. So we thought it would be a great idea to get a gallery in London and divided it into 3 sections, and where I showed men, you know, the Great Wall of Vagina, and I said, this is how women actually look like, and we are all different. But in the next stage of this gallery, I've placed 3 big, massive vulvas, based plasticine vulvas. Right. And what I did, I got, you know, garden forceps and
garden shears, giant garden shears. Okay.
And, you know, this is how I actually started performing FGM type 1, 2, and 3 right in front of them. And I remember...
And FGM 1, 2, or 3 is just the graduation of how severe the cutting is.
Absolutely.
So the deeper you go into 1 to 3, the less is left of the actual vagina intact.
It's nothing left at the end.
Right.
What I found really interesting is one of them literally nearly fainted in the room as I just started pricking at the clitoris. I didn't even start cutting anything.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a pivotal moment for them to actually realize, wait a minute, this is happening to our children, to our mothers. So what I did at the end of that stage was I showed them pictures of little girls and women who could potentially be their sister, their cousin, their mother, who've gone through it. And for me, showing people the physical effects and the psychological effects the women are living with, really, it's the key point to when we talk about education. We need to give people facts, not tiptoe around the subject. But then people are just we're gonna be stuck having this conversation in 10 years' time, I promise you.
Right.
But we need to give people the actual. We shouldn't shy away from it, because let me tell you one thing. First of all, we're not victims. We are survivors. We survived it because girls like us who didn't make it through, they died. Okay. So we need people to know what we've been through. So when you tiptoe around it, it's offensive to me. It's offensive to women like Jaha. Then you're saying it wasn't a big deal, or also you're making up another story that doesn't even imply what we've gone through. So for me, it's important to push for facts. We need facts, and this is exactly what happens to our girls. This is something that could have killed us. I think that's the message I want to put out there. We are here because we were lucky. We were the lucky ones.
Well, Layla, picking up on this point about education, Jaha, I'll bring you in here with this tweet. This is an interesting point from James, and I'd like to know what you think about it. He says, education has had little effect as many of the affected countries don't educate women, and it's women who cut. He goes on to say it's like foot binding. Old-fashioned women think if girls aren't cut, they won't get a husband.
I mean, they do believe in some cultures FGM is a condition for marriage. If if a girl hasn't gone through FGM, then men don't want to marry her. I know a woman in Atlanta, she hasn't gone through FGM. She's actually embarrassed for people to know that she hasn't gone through FGM because she thinks people are going to judge her based on that.
And that's even though she lives in the
here
US.
in America. And you know, there are women that have daughters, they don't want anyone to know that their daughters haven't gone through FGM because they're afraid of what the community might say about them. You know, there's a word in Gambia, they refer to uncut women as solimamas, which
refer to them as what?
Solima, which means that they're not clean.
Wow.
And other kids don't want to
Can
play
I just
with
comment
them.
on the international angle,
You know,
if possible?
But
Yeah, Jane, hold tight for a second. Let just Jaha finish and
it
we'll
has
come back to you.
you know, whatever,
Yeah, sure.
because we're immigrants, and when we move to the US, we bring our culture with us. We bring the foods that we cook. We wear the same clothes that we do, and that's the same attitude that our kids have. And it's just,
But even second and third generation kids.
I mean, it's still there. Like, you know, it's still there. Like, people look at my daughter, and I'm, you know, she's young, but I'm worried that when she grows up, people will judge her based on the work that I'm doing.
So but that's if she marries within your community.
Not even if she marries, but just the fact that we live in that community, we meet other parents. People look at me that the work that I'm doing, that I'm going against Islam, even though I'm not, and people are saying that I'm going against their culture. So I'm sure people are going to judge my daughter because of that. People are not going to want their daughters to play with my daughter. People are not going to want their daughters to hang with my daughters.
Have you
because
seen
they're
that
going.
yet? I mean, your daughter's
it
a
is
cutie.
it is going to happen because, I mean, and I had this discussion with Layla, wherein I think she's already experienced something similar to that. And this is not just, you know, I experience it from the community, wherein people look at me in a certain way, even when I go to the mosque, even when I go to weddings. Like,
Do you think you're a bad person?
Exactly. People look at me like I'm not as holy as they are, or like I'm an outcast, like I'm not, as just because I'm advocating against FGM, they feel like I'm going against their culture, I'm going against their religion. And I want people to understand this is not about going against culture, it's not about going against religion. For me, it's about knowing what's wrong and what's right. And as you know, I'm not an outsider that's coming to them and telling them that this is wrong. I am from that community, and I have been through this act. And the fact that I'm able to stand and tell women that this is something that's wrong, and they know it's wrong, even though these
You think they know?
They know it's wrong. They know exactly how they feel. It's just like, you know, when a woman is being physically abused by their spouse and they refuse to get out of that situation, that's the same thing. They know exactly what they've been through. It's just that they don't want to stand up, they don't want to talk against it, but I think they know. And the fact that people are coming against me as women, I think it's time that we stand up. It's time that we say enough is enough. We know how we feel sexually, emotionally, physically, and it's time that we stand up and say it has to end.
Jane, you wanted to give us an international perspective. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to respond to the tweet you read out, which I think was overly gloomy in its perspective. I mean, no one underestimates the difficulty of eliminating FGM worldwide. But 2 weeks ago in London, we brought together over 100 countries, many ministers from practicing countries and doctors and other sort of community leaders came together and made significant pledges of action. And I think that what we are seeing, and one of the things that's always inspired me, is that we are seeing so much African leadership, for example, on FGM, right from both the top of governments in some cases, but also from incredible, brave, mostly female campaigners on the ground. In some cases, I've met sort of women MPs going from village to talk about FGM and to talk against it. So I think we are beginning to see real signs right across the world of change in this.
Right.
So I do think, I think the view that nothing can change, it doesn't matter, women are doing it to women. I mean, all of these things are problems, but we do see real change happening.
I tell you what I was surprised to see, Jane, and this was David Cameron, British Prime Minister, say this, and you can see this quote on my laptop here. Abhorrent practices like these, he's talking about FGM, no matter how deeply rooted in societies, violate the rights of girls and women across the world, including here in the UK. That's a pretty bold statement for a Prime Minister to actually come out and say. Malika, what's the community?
Well, I don't think it's bold at all, actually. I think, I'm absolutely delighted that our Prime Minister is showing that leadership.
Yeah,
but I mean,
Jane,
it is right.
Who else has said that, though? Abhorrent practices. Who else has said that? In Washington, if you can't get a politician to talk about a vagina, here you have a Prime Minister here saying this is an abhorrent practice. That was my point. I think this is...
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what I think.
The Prime Minister has given terrific leadership on this.
Yeah.
But we are also seeing, we are seeing other countries speak out.
Sure.
It's really important that we're seeing that,
Right.
both, in the UN and elsewhere. I mean, I've met campaigns from other countries, but, I'm pleased that Britain is taking some form of lead here. But there is cause for optimism, but we now have to keep this up. In some countries, we are seeing the intergenerational drop-off of the prevalence of FGM really start to decrease, and we have to build on that good work.
And that's a good message, because I don't want people to come away from this conversation being incredibly depressed.
And in the US, I do want people to know that we do have politicians that are, tackling this issue. We have Joseph Crowley, who has been passionate about this issue, has pushed
and some really
bill.
unusual people as well. You
Exactly.
wouldn't necessarily think they would be supporters of
even Senator Harry Reid, he's also a supporter of FGM, and Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas. They're the three politicians in the
and
US.
not supporters of FGM, I should say.
No,
supporters of ending FGM, of
ending
course.
FGM. People that have been advocates for.
Sure.
These are people that I know have done something to end FGM. But I think the Obama administration needs to do more. They need to work with survivors like they've done in the UK, because I know the UK government has worked with survivors to come up with better solutions. In the US, they need to do that. They need to listen to women that are affected by this, so that we can learn from each other, bring together an interagency work group, so that we can end this issue, not only in the next few years, but in our generation.
And Leila, I see you nodding your head. I want to take this back to the local, because that's where our community is taking it. So Emma writes in, what's needed is re-education for men, women, and those societies who feel it's a rite of passage for women and it's normal. Another suggestion on Facebook, Katun says FGM is a cultural practice and culture is dynamic. Here and abroad, activists need to influence religious leaders, community chiefs, who can then influence perception around FGM. So what are some of your tactics for going into communities and working to end this?
I think working with community is absolutely part of the solution of this problem, but that's not the only way we're going to eradicate it. The problem is we all have to work together. It has to come from grassroots level, because I can't work as a grassroots level without the political will. It's impossible. And politicians can't work without the grassroots work. So for me, you can't have it, but you can't just have one way. So I think, for me, working with community leaders, mothers are really, really key people to work with. But number one, people we need to work with, it's our next generation. We need to be in our schools. We need to be in our youth services. We need to change the mindset of the next generation. That's where I am at the moment, to be honest.
Right.
Because my mother's generation, they're set in their ways. Nothing's going to change. But for me, it's safeguarding the next generation. Like Jaha said earlier, when me and her speak out, our lives are at risk. Our daughter's lives are at risk. And what Jaha was saying earlier, my daughter's now going to be 12 on Friday. She's already experiencing the fact, because I've been very open about not her being cut. But there is the stigma that comes along with that. But her school needs to offer a space for her, a safe space for her, so she can be protected. So for me, educating the next generation is absolutely key, and I think the young people from Bristol have started that journey for us.
All right, so I'm going to wrap up this conversation for now. Everybody's nodding with an agreement there. So we have Jaha Marie Ducouret, we have Leila Hussein, Matt Chisty, Jane Allison. Thank you very much for being part of this discussion. I wish you the best of luck with all of your campaigning. On the next show, from toxic milk to expired meat, how do people in China know what's safe to eat in a country that's troubled by food safety scandals? That is a big conversation for the next AJ stream. Until then, see you online.